Welcome in, welcome in, welcome in. This is Fabulous Nuts ASMR, and tonight we're reading some fairy tales. Oh, yes, we are. Yes, we are. Tonight's fairy tales are a continuation of the old Dutch classics. This is Dutch Fairy Tales 4. Let me get the whole word for you. Dutch Fairy Tales for Young Folks. It was written by William Elliott Griffiths. Published New York Thomas Crawley Company in 1918. That makes this a book in the public domain. One thing I have found out is it is very different than the other fairy tales. The Dutch fairy tales kind of hit a little harder. They're not so sweet. A lot of them have stories and are explaining historic things that happened in different regions of, like the last one was Holland or in Dutchland, but definitely not necessarily the warm cozies we expect in a lot of our modern fairy tales. A little dark. So let's get into these stories tonight. The first story we're reading is called The Cat and the Cradle. In the early ages, when our far-off ancestors lived in the woods, ate acorns, slept in caves, and dressed in skins of wild animals, they had no horses, cows, or cats. Their only pets and helpers were dogs. The men and the dogs were more like each other than they are now. However, they knew about bees, so the women gathered honey and from it made mead. Not having any sugar, the children enjoyed tasting honey more than anything else, and it was the only sweet thing they had. By and by, cows were brought into the country, and the Dutch soil being good for grass, the cows had plenty to eat. When the animals multiplied, the people drank milk and learned to make cheese and butter. So the Dutch boys and girls grew fat and healthy. The oxen were so strong they could pull logs of wood or draw a plow. So little by little, the forests were cut down and grassy meadows full of bright colored flowers took their place. Houses were built and the people were rich and happy. Yet there were still many cruel men and bad people in the land. Sometimes, too, floods came and drowned the cattle and covered the fields with sand or salt water. In such times, food was very scarce. Thus it happened that not all the babies born could live, or every little child be fed. The baby girls especially were often left to not survive, because war was common and only boys that grew into strong warriors were wanted. It grew to be custom that families would hold a council and decide whether the baby should be raised or not. But if anyone should give the infant even a tiny drop of milk or food of any kind, it was allowed to live and grow up. If no one gave it milk or honey, it passed. No matter how much a mother might love her baby, she was not allowed to put milk to its lips if the grandmother or elders forbade it. The young bride coming into her husband's home always had to obey his mother, for she was now as a daughter and one of the family. They all lived together in one house, and the grandmother ruled all of the women and girls that lived under one roof. This was the way of the world when our ancestors were pagans and not always as kind to little babies as our own mothers and fathers are now. Many times was the old grandmother angry when her son had taken a wife and a girl was born. If the old woman expected a grandson who should grow up and be a fighter with a sword and spear, and it turned out to be a girl, she was mad as fire. Often the pretty bride brought into the house had a hard time of it with her husband's mother if she did not in time have a baby boy. In those days, a Herman or war man and German were one and the same word. Now, when the good missionaries came into Friesland, one of the first of the families to receive the gospel was one named Alfred, with his bride who became a Christian. Alfred helped the missionaries to build a church. By and by, a sweet little baby was born in the family, and the parents were very happy. They loved the little thing, as fathers and mothers love their children now. But when someone went and told the pagan grandmother that the new baby was a girl instead of a boy, the old woman flew into a rage and would have gone at once to get hold of the baby and put it into the earth. Her lameness, however, made her move slowly, and she could not find her crutch, for the midwife, who knew the bad temper of the grandmother, had purposely hid it. The old woman was angry because she did not want any more females in the big house where she thought there were already too many. Food was hard to get, and there was not enough war men to defend the tribe. She meant to get the new baby and give it to the wolves. The old grandmother was a pagan and still worshipped the cruel gods that loved fighting. She did not like the new religion because it taught gentleness and peace. But the midwife, who was a neighbor, feared that the old woman was malicious, and she had hid her crutch. This she did so that if the baby was a girl, she could save its life. The midwife was a good woman who had been taught that the great Creator loves little girls as well as boys. So when the midwife heard the grandmother storm and rave while hunting for her crutch, she ran first to the honey jar and dipped her forefinger in it and put some drops of honey on the baby's tongue. Then she passed it out the window to some women's friends who were waiting outside. She knew the law that if the child tasted food, she must be allowed to live. The kind woman took the baby to their home and fed it carefully. A hole was drilled in the small end of a cow's horn, and the warm milk, fresh from the cow, was allowed to fall drop by drop into the baby's mouth. In a few days, the little one was able to suckle its breakfast slowly out of the horn while one of the girls held it. So the baby grew bigger every day. All the time it was carefully hidden. The foolish grandmother was foiled, for she could never find out where the baby girl was, which all the time was growing strong and plump. Her father secretly made her a cradle, and he and the babe's mother came often to see their child. Everyone called her Little Honey. Now, about this time, cats were brought into the country, and the children made such pets of them that some of the cows seemed to be jealous of the attention paid to the cats and the kittens. These were the days when cows and people all lived under one long roof. The children learned to tell the time of day, whether it was morning, noon, or night, by looking into the cat's eyes. They seemed to open and shut very much as if they had doors. A fat cat, which was brought into the house where Little Honey was, seemed to be very fond of the little girl, and the two, the cat and the child, played much together. It was often said that the cat loved the baby even more than her own kittens. Everyone called the affectionate animal by the nickname which meant Little Double, because this cat was twice as loving as most cats' mothers are. When her first furry little babies were young, she carried them from one place to another in her mouth. But this way of holding kittens she never tried on the baby. She seemed to know better. Indeed, Little Double often wondered why human babies were born so naked and helpless, for at an age when her kittens could feed themselves and run about and play with their tails and catch each other, Little Honey was not yet able to crawl. But other dangers were in store for the little girl. One day, when the men were out hunting and the women went into the woods to gather nuts and acorns, a great flood came. The waters washed away the house so that everything floated into the great river and down towards the sea. What would become of our baby? So thought the parents of Little Honey when they came back to find their house swept away and no sign of their little daughter. Little Double and her kittens and all the cows were gone too. Now it happened that when the flood came and the house crashed down, Baby was sound asleep. The cat, leaving its kittens that were now pretty well grown up, leapt up and onto the top of the cradle and floated, and the two floated off together. Pretty soon they found themselves left alone with nothing in sight that was familiar except for one funny thing. That was a wooden shoe in which was a fuzzy little yellow chicken, hardly 4 days old. It had been playing in the shoe when the floods came and swept it off from under the very beak of the old hen, that with all her other chicks was speedily drowned. On and on the raging flood bore Baby and Kitty until night came down. For hours more they drifted until, happily, the cradle was swept into an eddy in front of a village. There it spun round and round, and might have soon bore into the great flood, which seemed to roar louder as the water rose. Now a cat can see sometimes in the night, better even in the day, for the darker it becomes, the wider open the eyes of the cat, and bright sunshine at noon, the inside doors of the cat's eyes close to narrow slits, while at night these doors open wide. That is the reason why, in the days before clocks, the watches were made. The children could tell about the time of day by looking into cat's eyes. Sometimes they named their cat Clogs, which means clock eyes, or bell eyes, for bell clocks are older than clocks with a dial, and because in Holland the bells rings out the hour and past quarter hours. Cats looked up and saw the church towers looming up in the dark. At once she began to meow and caterwaul with all her might. She hoped that someone in the houses near the riverbank might catch the sound, but none seemed to hear or heed. At last, when Kitty was nearly exhausted with howling, a light appeared at one of the windows. This showed that someone was up and moving. It was a boy who was named Derek, after Saint Theodoric, who had first long ago built a church in the village. Then Kitty opened her mouth and lungs again and set up a regular cat scream. This awakened all her other relatives in the village, and every Tom and Kitty made answer until there was a cat concert of meows and caterwauls. The boy heard, rushed downstairs, opened his door, listened. The wind blew out his candle, but the brave lad was guided by the sound which the cat made. Reaching the bank, he threw off his wooden clumps, plunged into the boiling waters, and seized the cradle, towing it ashore. Then he woke up his mother and showed her his prize. The way the baby laughed and crowed and patted the horn of milk and kicked up its toes in delight over the warm milk which was brought was a joy to see. Near the hearth in the middle of the floor, little Double, the kitty, was given some straw for a bed, and after purring joyfully, was soon, like the baby, sound asleep. Thus the cat warned the boy, and the boy saved the baby. That was very welcome in a family where there were no girls, but only a boy. When little Honey grew up to be a young woman, she looked as lovely as a princess, and in the church was married to Derek. It was the month of April, and all the world was waking to flowers when the wedding procession came out of the church. The air was sweet with opening of the buds. Before the next New Year's Day arrived, there lay in the same cradle and put to sleep over the same rockers a baby boy. When they brought him to the front, the good grandmother named him Lud something. He grew up to be a great missionary, whose name in Friesland is, even today, after 1,000 years, a household word. He it was who drove out bad fairies, vile enchanters, wicked spirits, and terrible diseases. Best of all, he banished eye-bite, which was the name people gave to witchcraft. Ludiger also made it hard for the naughty elves and spirits to delude men. After this, it was easy for the good spirits that lived in the kind hearts and noble lives to multiply and prosper. The wolves were driven away or killed off and became very few, while the cattle and sheep multiplied until everybody could have a woolen coat, and there was a cow to every person in the land. But the people still suffered from floods that from time to time drowned the cattle and human beings, and the ebb tides that carried everything out to sea. Then the good missionary taught the men how to build dikes that kept out the ocean and made the water of the rivers stay between the banks. The floods became fewer and fewer, and at last rarely happened. Then Santa Claus arrived to keep alive in the hearts of people the spirit of love and kindness and good cheer forever. At last, when nearly 100 years had passed away, little Honey, once the baby girl, and then the dear old lady who was kind to everybody and prepared the way for Santa Claus, passed. Then also little Double the cat, that had 9 lives, passed with her. They buried the old lady under the church floor and stuffed the cat that everybody, kittens, boys, and girls, and people loved. By and by, when the cat's tail and fur fell to pieces, the ears tumbled off, its glass eyes dropped out. A skillful artist chiseled a statue of little Double, which still stands over the tomb in the church. Every year on Santa Claus Day, December 6th, the children put a new collar around its neck and talk about the cat that saved a baby's life. The stories get a little dark. Oh, hey, Stinkbug, welcome in. That is interesting that you harvested quail eggs. Nice. Hey, Patrick. Hey. Thank you, guys. All right. We get a sip. Let me change our backdrop for the next story. And we shall move on to the next story. All right. We're reading Dutch fairy tales for the young. The Dutch, their fairy tales are a little hard-hitting. Prince Spinhead and Miss Snow White. Long ago, before the Romans came into the land, when the fairies ruled in the forest, there was a maiden who lived under an old oak tree. When she was a baby, they called her Bumlikin. She had 4 brothers who loved their younger sister very dearly and did everything they could to make her happy. Her fat father was a famous hunter. When he roamed the woods, no bear, wolf, or roebuck, deer, or big animal of any kind could escape his spear. I'm sorry. Or his pit traps. He taught his sons to be skillful. Hold on, guys. Sorry. Sorry about that. He taught his sons to be skillful in the chase, but also to be kind to the dumb creatures when captured, especially when the mother beast was captured. The boys were always told to care for the cubs, whelps, and kittens. As for the smaller animals, foxes, hares, weasels, rabbits, or ermine, these were so numerous that the father left the business of hunting them to the lads, who had great sport. The house under the oak tree was always well provided with meat and furs. The 4 brothers brought the little animals, which they took in the woods to make presents to their sister. So there was always plenty of pets: bears, wolf cubs, wild cats, kittens, baby roach, and for the girl to play with. Every day, while the animals were so young as to be fed on milk, she enjoyed frolicking with the 4-footed babies. When they grew bigger, she romped and sported with them as if she and they were equal members of the same family. The older brothers watched carefully so that the little brutes, as they increased in size, shouldn't bite or claw his sister, for he knew the fierce nature that was in the wild creatures. Yet the maiden had wonderful powers over these beasts of the forest, whether little or big. She was not very much afraid of them, and often made them run by looking at them hard in the eyes. While the girl made a pet of the animals, her parents made a pet of her. The mother prepared the skin of the wolves and bears until they were very soft, keeping the fur on to make the rugs for the floor, the winter coats for her children, the hides stuffed for rougher use. But from what had once been the clothes of the fawn, the weasel, the rabbit, and the ermine, garments were made that were smooth enough to suit a baby's tender flesh. The forest folk wrapped their infants in swaddling bands made of these dressed pelts. After feeding the darling, the mother hugged her baby up, warmly covered to a tree branch. The cradle was a furry bag, was made of the same material, and swung in the wind. Bumblekin usually fell asleep right after she had her breakfast. When she woke up crowing, the squirrels were playing all around her. She even learned to watch the spiders spinning their homes of silk without being afraid. When Bumblekin grew up, she always called this curious creature that could make silk Spinhead. She jokingly called it her lover in remembrance of baby days. It was funny to see how deft the mother was with her needles, fashioned from bone, and her rough thread, which was made of the intestines of the deer. From her own childhood in the woods, Bumblekin's mother had been used to the kind of dressmaking. Now, when her daughter had grown from babyhood and through her teens to be a lovely maiden, fair of face and strong of limb, her sweet, unselfish parents was equal to a new task. To the soft leather coats made from the skins of fawns, martens, and weasels, she added trims of snow-white ermine. Capes and mittens, cloaks for the body, and coverings for the feet were fashioned to fit. Fringes here and there were put on them until the girl looked like the king's daughter. In summer, the skins of birds and their feathers clothed her lightly, and with many and rich colors the forest flowers decked her hair. In winter, her white forest robes, the maiden, except for her rosy face and sparkling eyes, seemed as if she might have been born of the snow, or was the daughter of the northern ice god. And because she was so lovely, her parents changed her baby name and called her Snow White. Yet, though no other girl in Glenderland equaled, and none, not even the princess, excelled Snow White in beauty of face, form, or raiment, the maiden was not happy. Even though many lovers came to her and offered to marry her, some, as proof of their skills as hunters, brought the finest furs and forest furnished. Others showed their strength or fleetness of foot. Some bargained with kabouters or fairies of the mines to bring them shining ore or precious gems which they offered to Snow White. Others again went afar to get strange wonders, amber, or from the seashores of the far north, seahorses to please her. One fine fellow who had been in the south and was proud of his travels told her what he had seen in the great cities and offered her a necklace of pearls, but all was in vain. Every lover went away sorrowful, for Snow White wearied of them and sent each one home disappointed. Long at last, among the lovers came a strange-looking one named Spinhead, resembling a spider, promising a secret worth more than furs, gold, gems, or necklace. But the mother, seeing the ugly creature, drove it off with a hard word. So the months and years passed, until her father feared he would not live to see his daughter a wife. But one day, when the household were absent, the leaves of the oak tree rustled loudly. There was no wind, and Snow White, surprised, strained her ears to find out what this might mean. Soon she could make out these words: "When the spider that you called Spinhead comes to make love to you, listen to him. He is the wisest being in the forest. He knows the future. He will tell you a secret. I shall pass away, but what he teaches, you shall live." And then the leaves of the oak ceased to rustle, and all was quiet again still. While wondering what this strange message might mean, down came the real spider she had named Spinhead. He lowered himself from a tree branch high above on a silken thread. The creature sat down on the log beside the maiden, but she was not the least bit startled and did not scream or run away. Indeed, she spoke to the spider as an old friend. "Well, playmate of my babyhood, what have you to tell me? I came to offer you my love. You need not marry me yet, but if you will let me spin a web in your room, I shall live there. By and by reward you. Let me be in your sight always, and you will not be sorry for it." The maiden had no sooner agreed than a terrible tempest rooted the oak and leveled the trees of the forest. In a moment more, a new and very beautiful house rose up out of the ground. It was a noble to look at as a was as noble as a palace. Nearby was a garden, and one day she walked in it. Out of it sprang a blue flower almost under her feet. "Choose the best room for yourself," said Spinhead, "and then show me my corner. After 100 days, if you treat me kindly, I shall reveal the secret of the blue flower." Snow White, the maiden, chose the sunniest room and gave Spinhead the best corner near the window and close to the ceiling. At once he began to weave a shining web for his own house. She wondered what such fine work no human weaver could excel, and why she was not able to spin silk out of her head, nor even with her fingers like her strange lover. But the oak had promised that Spinhead would reveal a secret, and she was curious what that secret was. Like all little girls, she was in a hurry to have the secret to ease her impatience. Snow White looked on while Spinhead was thus busy at making his dwelling place with shining threads which spun out ever ceasingly. She was so intent upon watching him that night came down before she noticed that her room was not furnished. There was not even a bed to sleep on. Spinhead looked at her closely and then spoke with a deep voice like a man. "Ah, I know you want a bed and pretty things for your room." In another moment, soft furs lined the floor, and soon all of Snow White had possessed in the forest for comfort. She had now and more. Lost in wonder as she was, in a few minutes she was fast asleep. She dreamed she wore a dress of some strange, new white fabric, such as her people never had before seen. Instead of being close in texture like the skin of an animal, it was open work, full of thousands of little holes, yet strongly held together. It was light and gauzy, like the silvery spider web on the summer grass. Before sunrise, when the pearly it's pearly with dewdrops, the 100 days passing swiftly by, and Spinhead and Snow White became fast friends. Each lived in a different world, a world within a world. She was waiting for the secret he had to tell her. She bravely resolved not to be impatient, but let Spinhead speak first. One day, when autumn had come, she was lonely. She sauntered out into the garden. The chill winds were blowing and the leaves falling till they covered the ground like a yellow carpet. One fell into her hand as if it bore words of friendly greeting. Yet though she waited, not one of the million of them brought a message to her. Never a word had she ever heard from her parents or brothers. The blue flower had long ago fallen away. There was nothing in its place but a hard, rough, black stalk. Then she said to herself, "Is there anything in this ugly stick? How will Spinhead reveal its secret?" Never had she been so cast down. Again the tempest howled. All the winds of heaven seemed to break loose. Many a sturdy oak lay prostrate. The leaves darkened the air so that Snow White could see nothing. Then there was a great calm. The maid cleared her sight, and lo, there beside her stood a youth, more beautiful than any of her brothers or her lovers or any man she had ever seen. He was dressed in fine white cloth, excelling in its texture any skin of a fawn or animal of the forest. Instead of being leather, however soft, it seemed to be woven of a multitude of threads. In his hand he held the black stalk of what had been the blue flower. "I am Spinhead," he said. "The 100 days are over. The spell is broken, and my deliverance from enchantment has come. I bring to you as my gift this ugly stalk on which the blue flower bloomed." Between surprise at the change of Spinhead from a spider to a handsome youth, and disappointment at such a present offered her, Snow White was dumb. She could hardly draw her breath. "Was that all?" "Break it open," said Spinhead. Splitting the stalk from end to end, the maiden was surprised to find inside many long, silky fibers, almost as fine as the strands in the spider's web. She pulled them out, and her eyes danced with joy. "Plant the seeds and let the blue flowers blossom by millions," said the youth. "And gather the stalks, and from the fibers weave them together and make this. The black robe is a scepter of wealth." Then, separating the delicate strands one by one, Spinhead wove them together. The result was a rich robe of snow-white fabric, never seen in the forest. It was linen. Snow White clapped her hands with joy. "This for your wedding dress, if you will marry me," said Spinhead. Snow White's cheeks blushed red, but she looked at him with her eyes and said yes. "Wait," said Spinhead, "I will make your bridal veil." Once more his fingers wrought wonders. He produced yards of gauzy openwork stuff. He made it float in the air first, then he threw it over her head. It trailed down her back and covered her rosy face. It was lace. Happily married, they left the forest and traveled to the land where the blue flax flowers made a new sky on earth. Soon, on the map, men read the names of cities unknown before, at a time when Europe had no such masses of happy people, joyous in their toils. What the blue flower of flax had done for the country, more than gold, gems, or wealth of the forest or mines, was the gift of Spinhead to Snow White for making the land famous. Hello, Alameen. Welcome in, welcome in. Well, good morning to you. Good morning, good morning. All right, guys. Let us see what shall be our next story. Let's change our screen. Let's see. Let's go right here now. We use this one? I don't think so. All right. My magic book. Let's see. Thank you guys for listening to Dutch Fairytales. The next story is The Boar with the Golden Bristles. For some reason, I think I know this one. The Boar with the Golden Bristles. Long ago were brave fighters and skillful hunters in Holland, but neither men nor women ever dreamed that food was to be got out of the ground, but only from trees and bushes such as berries, acorns and honey. They thought the crust of the earth was too hard to be broken up for seed, even if they knew what grain and bread were. They supposed that what nature provided in the forest was the only food for men. Besides this, they made their women do all the work and cook the acorns and brew the honey into meat, while they went out and fish and hunt and fight. So the fairies took pity on the cold northern people who lived where it rained and snowed a great deal. They held a council and agreed it was time to send down to earth an animal with tusks to tear up the ground. Then the people would see the riches of the earth and learn what the soil was. They would be blessed with farms and gardens, barns and stalls, hay, grains, horses, cattle, wheat, barley, pigs, and clothes. Now, there were powerful fairies of a certain kind who lived in a happy land far away, who had charge of everything in the air and water. One of them, named Fro, who became the lord of summer, sunshine, and warm showers that make all things grow, was in this bright region that the white elves lived. It was a pretty custom in fairyland that when a fairy baby cut its first tooth, the mother's friend should make the little one some pretty presents. When Nithras, the mother of the infant Fro, looked into his mouth and saw the little white thing that had come up through the baby's gums, she went in great glee and told the glad news to all the other fairies. It was a great event, and she tried to guess what presents her wonderful baby boy should receive. There was a giant-like fairy as strong as a polar bear who agreed to get Fro for a creature that could put his nose under the sod and root up the ground. In this way, he would show the men of the earth just under the surface contained, without their going into mines and caverns. One day, this giant fairy heard two stout dwarfs talking loudly in the region under the earth. They were boasting as to which could beat the other in the fire and bellows, for both were blacksmiths. One was the king of the dwarfs, who made a bet that he could excel the other. So he set them to work as rivals, with the third dwarf working the bellows. The dwarf king threw some gold in the flames to melt, but fearing he might not win the bet, he went away to get other fairies to help him. He told the bellows dwarf to keep on pumping air on the fire, no matter what might happen to him. So when one giant fairy in the form of a gadfly flew at him and bit him in the hand, the bellow blower did not stop for the pain, but kept on until the fire roared loudly as to make the cavern echo. Then all the gold melted and could be transformed. As soon as the dwarf king came back, the bellows blower took up the tongs and drew out of the fire a boar having golden bristles. This fire-born golden boar had the power of traveling through the air as swiftly as a streak of lightning. Its name was Gulen, or Golden, and was given to the fairy Fro. And he, when grown, used the wonderful creature as his steed. All the other good fairies and elves rejoiced because the men on earth would now be helped to do great things. Even more wonderful, to tell his fire-born creature became the father of all the animals that have tusks that roam the woods. A tusk is a big tooth of which the hardest and the sharpest parts grow long and sharp outside of the mouth, and it stays there even when the mouth is shut. When Gollum was not occupied or being ridden by Fro on his errands over the world, he taught his sons, that is, the wild boars of the forest, how to root up the ground and make it soft for things to grow in. Then his master Fro sent the sunbeam and warm showers to make the turned up earth fruitful. To do this, the wild boars were given 2 long tusks, as pointed as needles and sharp as knives. With one sweep of his head, the boar could rip open a dog or a wolf, a bull or a bear, or furrow the earth like a plowshare. Now, there are several cousins in the tusked family: the elephant on land, the walrus, the narwhal in the seas, but none of these could plow ground. But because the boar's tusks grew out so long and were so sharp and hooked at the end, it could tear open the earth's hard crust and root up the ground. This made a soil fit for tender plants to grow. Even in the wild, flowers sprung up in them. All this, when they first noticed it, was very wonderful to human beings. The children called one to the other to come and see the unusual sight. The little troughs, made first by the ripping of the boar's tusk, were widened by rooting with their snouts. These were welcomed by the birds, for they hopped into the lines, thus to feed on worms. So the birds, supposing that these little gutters in the ground were made especially for them, made great friends with the boars. They even perched near by or fly to their backs and ride on them. As for the men fathers, when they looked at the clods and loose earth thus turned over, they found them to be very soft. So the women and girls were able to break them up with their sticks. Then the seeds dropped by the birds that came flying back every springtime from faraway lands sprouted. It was noticed that a new kind of plant grew up, which had stalks, and the heads or ears of those were 100-fold more seed. When the children tasted them, they found to their delight that these little grains were good to eat. They swallowed them whole, they roasted them at fire, or they pounded them with stone. Then they baked the meal, or thus made it into mush, eating it with honey. For the first time, people in the Dutch world had bread. When they added honey brought by the bees, they had a sweet cake with mead. Then, saving the seeds over from one summer to another, they in the springtime planted them in the little trenches made by the animals' tusks. Then the Dutch word for boar and row are now put together, meaning boar row, and there issued in time our word furrow. The women were the first to become skillful in baking. In the beginning, they used hot stones on which to lay a lump of meal or flour and water or the batter. Then, having learned about yeast, which rised the flour, that is, lifted it up with gases of bubbles, they made real bread and cakes and baked them in ovens which the men had made. When they put a slice of meat between the upper and lower layers of the bread, they called it broche. That is a little bread or sandwich. In time, instead of one kind of bread or cake, they had dozens or 20 different sorts, besides griddle cakes and waffles. Now, when the wise men of the mark or neighborhood saw that the women did such wonderful things, they put their heads together and said to one another, "We are really ready to confess that fairies and elves and even the kabouters are smarter than we are. Our women also are certainly wonderful, but it will never do to let the boars think that they know more than we do. They did indeed teach us how to furrow, and the birds brought us the grain, but we are the greater, for we can hunt and kill the boars with our spears. Although they can tear up the soil and root in the ground with the Tuscan snouts, they cannot make cakes as our women can. So let's see if we cannot beat both the boar and the birds and even excel our women. We shall be more like the fairies if we invent something that will outshine them all." So they thought and planned, and little by little they made the plow. First it was a sharp stick in their hands, and the men scratched the surface of the ground into lines that were not very deep. They nailed plates of iron on these sticks. Next they fixed iron-shod wood in a frame to be pulled forward. By and by they added handles. Men and women harnessed together pulled the plow. Indeed, it was ages before they had oxen to do the heavy work for them. At least the perfect plow was seen. It had a knife in the front to cut the clods, a clodder, a beam, a mold board, and handles. After a while, a wheel to keep it straight. Then they set horses to draw it. Fro, the fairy, was the owner, not only of the boar with the golden bristles, but also of the lightning-like horse that could ride through fire and water with the speed of light. Fro also owned the magic ship, which could navigate both land and sea. It was very elastic, and it could be stretched out to carry a host of warriors over the sea to war, or fold up like a lady's handkerchief with a flying vessel. Fro was able to move about like a cloud, and also to change like them. He could also appear or disappear as he pleased in one place or another. By and by, the wild boars were all hunted to extinction and disappeared. Yet, in one way, and a glorious one also, their name and fame were kept in men's memories. Brave knights had the boar's head painted on their shields and coats of arms. When the faith of the Prince of Peace made wars less frequently, the temples in honor of Fro were deserted, but the Yule log and the revelers held to celebrate with the passing of the Mother Night in December, that is, the longest one of the year, were changed for the Christmas festival. Then again, the memory of man's teacher of the plow was still kept green, for the boar was remembered as the giver not only of nourishing meat, but the idea for men's brains, baked in the oven and made delightful to the appetite, served on the dish with its own savory odors, withal decorated with sprigs of rosemary. The boar's head was brought in for the great dinner with the singing of Christmas carol. And with that, it will end. Hello, blessings, everybody. Thank you for coming in for our old Dutch fairy tales. Really explains a lot